Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me. I'm Mia, and I'm really excited to have Adam with me here today. I got connected with Adam during COVID when I was like, probably many of you kind of trying to figure out what to do with my business. So we're going to talk about PMAs today, private membership associations. And yeah, well, welcome, Adam. I just want to thank you for being here with us today. I'm so happy to have you share your wisdom with us. How are
Thank you.
you?
I'm doing good. Thank you. Thank you. Good.
um, yeah, I thought maybe I'll share a little bit just about how I just discovered PMAs, what a PMA is myself, my process. It might give you guys a little bit of an idea of why this might be of interest to you. So essentially during, when COVID started, and that's a whole other conversation. But I was pretty aware and awake, and in the beginning I didn't know how that was going to play out. And I have a company, I do events, and I wanted to be able to still hold events, continue my business regardless of what was going on with what I saw as, just the corrupt government. So I just discovered the Private Membership Association, and Adam helped me set that up. And it's something that I'm going to use for an event that I have coming up. And so, um, and also I want to just say that discovering the PMA along with a lot of other truths about our legal system, which Adam can speak way better to than I can, of course. It really helps me to feel free. Essentially, it really helps me to kind of access what I call the freedom frequency. For me, it was realizing that we are sovereign beings and we do choose, and we're sort of agreeing to the systems to either comply with them, interact with them, or not. And so learning about, the kind of stuff that Adam shares about really helped me to feel free and know that I could consciously choose how I interact with the world, just with myself, with my business, and, all of it. It's all a choice that we have, how we deal with that. So yeah, Adam, I would love it if you maybe just could share just like briefly, or maybe even how you came to learn about the PMA, and just in a like brief overview what it is and um how it can help us in our personal businesses, I guess.
Okay. So where I started and learning on how to construct PMAs and operate under them started in international law. And it's to say, how do you define international law? And you can even reference the law of war manual that the United States military finds. And specifically, they define, as well as the rest of the world, define international law as from the writings and publishings of Hugo Grotius and Emmerich de Vittel, who wrote about the law of nations and the principles of natural law and the law of war and such, but specifically natural law, which if you understand the principles of natural law, which is kind of different from the laws of nature, but reciprocate each other. Like the laws of nature would be specifically, what happens naturally in nature, like physics, biology, reaction to provocation. As to natural law is the law of natural agreements, right? The law of natural relationships, which means the law of natural relationships between people, people and property, people and God, their faith, people and law and justice and equity, you know, um, and sort of what is a natural agreement. So international law has taught me a lot about, both public international law and private international law, which, both are subjected to each other in a sense, and they will always be. I commonly hear a lot that you operate in the private and don't go in the public, but there's no such thing. Your private association will always be subjected to the public law, And if you wanted to be in the most secure and, autonomous, type of association, you would operate under that sort, operating by acknowledging and accepting the public law into your association. So, such as that comes down to what is defined as customary international law, which defines three principles of peremptory norms, state practice, and something called opinio juris. Okay. Now, peremptory norms would be the enforcement of non derogable rights, which a non derogable right is a right not one human being or body of people can violate whatsoever. You know, like the right to be free from torture, the right to be free from murder, the right from your property being stolen, you know. So, like, peremptory norms, in a sense, you cannot violate. Nobody can, claim any obligation for any standing right to torture a human being. Thus, the right does not simply exist, right? So that's the first principle. The second principle would be state practice, which, if we learn throughout history, a state, right, has to operate in a certain way, um, that people do not feel that they've been violated, in a sense that they uprise, like revolt and rebel. So state practice and customs would be like, the right of free speech, the right, for property rights, including arms, the right to not have your home quartered or have your property searched and seized. Those are common customs of state practice, so people, live freely, right? And then you have opinio juris, which is the obligation out of necessity, which is the state's obligation to prove consent of the governed, voluntary. The people, their right to, have a membership or not. They have the right to object to membership or not be forced into it. So opinio juris would be like, social compacts and voting systems and suffrage rights and such like that, proving consent of the governed. And then overall, when you understand how customs and international law works, you're better in, defining your private bylaws in your association. And what a constitution really is an organization. So I would say that a private membership association and the way it operates is like synonymous to a trust, right? The differences would be that a trust has express powers, which means it's defined and recognized by how the legislator in your state does, make it law and statute, and that's where its express powers. As a private membership association is outside of that, you privately define it, which you can give it express powers if you put it under that obligation, but it doesn't necessarily have to. But at the same time, it still has to subject itself to public law, which is peremptory norms, state practice, and opinio juris. So it has to fit under that concept. So it's like to say, if you have a state, right, which, we're told throughout, law, which it's been redefined, which is under, not a good thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing. It's something that's done under communism, because communism is a reclassification. And if you would look at the state statutes today, they redefine the state to mean government office holders like governor, attorney general, secretary of state. So this is goes into a wide range of understanding jurisdiction and where your person is at, you know. But
Could,
that's another story. But go ahead. Were you gonna say something, Mia?
could we break it down a little bit into like a more like a story? Like, could you explain kind of the difference, like why I started to really like tune into this? Because I was realizing that okay, there was a store in a town where I used to live, and they became a private membership. And as I understand that, it was so that they could offer products that had been deemed illegal by
Mm-hmm.
the generally accepted system, like raw milk per se. So they created a private membership association, and the shoppers there would become a member, and then they could legally, as I understand, through the PMA, purchase the raw milk. Um, And it seems like that's essentially like that is one reason why we'd want to have a PMA, because it kind of puts us outside the jurisdiction of that generally accepted system we've been in. But it seems like what you're saying is that just because people are becoming a member, they're agreeing to the kind of the constitution of the PMA, but that doesn't mean that you can do something that is against natural law, right? You can't actually harm someone in a PMA. You still have to follow, um, and I don't remember how you termed it, but essentially
Public
like
law.
international law, right? Natural law,
Public law, yeah, public
public
international
law.
law.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, in a sense, think about it, right? You have the states during COVID, and we're not talking about the legitimate state because we were told, you know, and not just told, it's by law, the state is the people, right? Of the people, by the people, for the people. But
Mm-hmm.
and what I was going to is under communism and the reclassification, they redefined the people, I mean, not the people, sorry, the state to mean all government office holders. And I could reference you this statute and everything. So governors, attorney generals, members of the legislature, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it really comes down to where international law applies to the private membership association is that when the state, which they redefined, which is not good, it's illegal what they did, to say, okay, you need
Right.
to wear a face mask when you go into the stores. Well, okay, now the statute, if they made that law in the state, right, in the creature state we call them, because they're not the original surveys of the states done by people in that state, it's a creature of a state, which is a state within a state, and that gets into understanding surveys, and it's a whole nother topic and subject. But
Mm-hmm.
um, when a state starts violating international law, it is your power under international law through your private membership association to take that statute, that code, or that ordinance, and accuse it by showing the human rights violations of that statute, code, and ordinance. Because a statute, code,
Right.
and ordinance, even written from the legislator, cannot violate public international law.
So yeah, I kind of call that like the corrupt overlay, right? And you
Mhm.
speak of it in very precise terms, but it's like there's been a corrupt overlay, right? And then they are trying to get us to acquiesce to things that, in my opinion, yeah, are violations, right? The mask or needing a thing in your arm that's a jab to go to a restaurant or something.
Yeah.
Um, right? So we'd want to use the PMA basically, to understand what you're saying, is to like reset our my company, I'll use it in my experience, to what's actually sound legal international law, what and thus then if I say during, COVID would have had an event with the PMA, then I'm it's actually legal to I wouldn't have any, no one would need to adhere to those things that the overlay is saying they need to adhere to, right? So they wouldn't need to get the job, they wouldn't need to wear the mask, they wouldn't need to do those things. And then the entity, the PMA, is protected because it's actually aligned with true international law. Is that what you're saying, Adam?
Let me explain it like this, okay? Because a lot of people don't understand how the current system works and how jurisdiction operates and everything. So, in a sense, you have a trust. A trust is expressly designed, has express powers, which means it was defined by their state legislators. So, under international law, if you claim to be under something, then you're going to be subjected to it, right? So if you have a trust that's defined by the way they define trust by statutes, you're going to be subjected by their statutes in the way it says or claim. Now, what makes a private membership different is that it doesn't have express powers. The private membership association, where it gets its powers, is by who you do business with, which is, if you think about it, that's how jurisdiction works. Because the way the law works, right? Because there's four principles or elements, if you want to call them, that require the legal existence of a contract. That is offer, acceptance, performance, and consideration. And this applies to everything you do in your life. Okay. So let's take those principles like, if someone offered you a job, you first have to acknowledge what the obligations, the duties, and responsibilities of that offer. before you accept it. So you understand the terms and conditions and what you're doing, what you're obligated to. That's why most employers require a letter of acceptance because they want to know you could do the job. The performance is the work, and the consideration is the compensation or the pay for the work performed. So you need all those elements defined in a contract. And to mostly perfect most contracts, you need an authentication, meaning a written form with a signature and a date and witnesses, right? Because verbal doesn't always, it's not always provable. So written form always, you know, helps, define and place the accountability of that contract with authentication. Authentication is the signature, the date, and the witness or witnesses, right?
Mhm.
So when you have a PMA, right, and you are privately defined, you get your power by who you do business with. Because the way this country works, right? Because you look at what I say are the creature states, which is subsidiaries of the federal private association that operates as a corporation, right? Because they'll have shareholders and people who own stock in that, right? And the creature states, which are states within states, because you have the original defined state over its original survey, which is the meets and bounds of the state, which is geographical measurement, and they abandon that to go to a municipal overlay. So they're not operating under the state survey; they're operating under a municipal overlay. Then the so-called state prosecutors and the state courts and the state judges are still operating under those municipal forms. But the thing is, they are completely neglecting what creates a government and a legitimate public government is by having a social compact in place. And the social compact is that contract where people, multiple people come into that they agree that this is how they define society, what you can and cannot do in
Yeah,
society.
I
That
love, yeah. That feels really important because that's the big piece of the PMA, right? It's like this agreement. If you're becoming a member of, say, the Mercado Sagrada PMA, it's like means we're all agreeing on these principles, right?
Yeah, you come into social compact. That way you agree what is allowed and not allowed in the society you're creating, right? So, and
Yeah,
this is where people get a lot of things incorrect. Like they say they have constitutional rights. There's no such thing as constitutional rights, right? You get your rights from the social compact. There's a social compact, it would be presented in a constitution, but the only way it becomes legitimate is when it's authenticated by signatures and people actually accepting that contract by their authentication, signature, date, and witnesses. So the states are not operating under legitimate social compacts. Which what does that do? The social compact is the bilateral representation. That is the consent of the governed. They took away the bilateral representation through the social compact, and now all you have is unauthorized legislators unilaterally making rules for everyone else. You don't
right.
have the right to object.
Yeah, and like
Your
we
right
don't
to
like them. I don't like
yeah.
those rules.
So your right to object is to go to jail and prison and fight the court cases all the way up. That's your right to object. They make a law. That's how you object to it. You can't come forward and say, "Well, my bilateral representation, I can hold you accountable by what you agreed upon and the obligations through the social compact." So if you start making laws that violates my human rights, I can start accusing you of treason because you signed this contract. So we don't have a government, a public government. This is a private company offering government services. There's a difference.
Right.
And there's no social compact in place, which means the way they operate, right, the way they get their jurisdiction is by the terms and conditions you've accepted by the people you do business with. It's like for to say, if I don't know how it works out in Hawaii, but if you are here in the mainland, if you do business with waste management, for them to come, to for trash disposal, so they could come and take up your garbage and your trash, right? You do business with them, they have a terms and conditions, and their terms and conditions, one, they have their own privately defined courts, okay, and if you have a dispute with them or if they have a dispute with you, you go through their private courts first. And if they cannot settle in their private courts, they say, okay, we're going to mediate to either a municipal state, or federal, court. So by you doing business with waste management, that's where these municipal, state, and federal courts get their jurisdiction.
So are you saying that actually they're a PMA of sorts? Or literally is that the waste management and PMA?
They are a PMA, yes. They're a
Okay.
trust business that operates under a specific trust, but they are also a PMA in the way they define themselves.
Yes,
They just,
that's sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
So, like a private membership association does define itself as a trust or just a PMA, but it still has trust powers, which means the way it operates, it has a grantor, a grantee, a trustor, a settler, a trustee, and a beneficiary. And each status has its own purpose and intention. Like a grantor would grant property into a trust that funds the trust. The grantee receives it. The trustor writes the trust contract. The settler settles disputes. It's usually the trustor and the settler are the same person. The trustee is the one that manages the trust. That's the one that holds legal title, meaning in the name of. And the beneficiary has equitable title, which means he owns it.
So I feel like, yeah, I feel like I've been talking about it kind of the wrong way because I often will mention a PMA to people and I will say, like, this is kind of what a lot of the government entities and what we can use to operate outside of the system. But that's kind of, it sounds like that's like not really the right way to say it because in actuality, and correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, but what's happening is we're actually aligning with the true, what's truly true international law and what is meant to be the law here, but got subverted by that corrupt overlay. So what we're actually doing is aligning with truth and using um common or natural law, is that the right language, to protect our God-given rights and the right to um create essentially like a our own sort of community where we all agree to operate in a certain way. Like, all agree that raw milk is healthy and we like it and we want to drink that, or all agree that we want to do frequency healing and that's great. And so,
Yeah,
does that make sense? Does that make
yeah.
sense what I said, Adam?
Think about it. There's a lot of power in private membership associations, and the more PMAs come together, and let's say they actually come into social compact, they create a trade union, and they could create a trade union that's separate and foreign from what's operating now. And in that trade union, through the social compact, they have a say on how to have things operate. Like you have that actual voice. Now, this is why I explained the necessity of social compacts, because people don't understand how rights work. Most of the time, you'll see people run up to a cop and say, "I have the right to this, I have the right to that," and the cop will stand there looking at them like they're crazy, because people don't
Mhm.
understand what a right is. And
Mhm.
the majority of people, when I'll ask them, what is a right, and the answer I would get, "Oh, it's God given." It's God given. And I will say, I'll look at it, I'm like, yeah, there's certain rights that, endowed by nature through natural law is just an inherent, right, a human right. That's absolutely correct. But not all rights come from God. They can't. Because when men come together, what is a right, right? A right is defined as the obligation that requires performance. An obligation requires, in order, to have a standing right. To explain how that works is, through the logic of natural law. Like, for an example, you have the obligation to feed yourself or you're going to starve and die. Therefore, you have the right to forage, to hunt, to grow crops, to raise livestock, or to barter or trade. The right exists upon the obligation that requires its performance. And
Mhm.
that is how the law works. So when you're coming down to a contract, you have to define those obligations. And there has to be a litmus test. A litmus test means that the other party actually understands the obligations. And unless you have a litmus test, you don't know if they can properly perform on the obligations or not. So a litmus test is necessary for the acceptance. So you have a bunch of people, that are running around that, are not perfecting what the requirements of a contract are. And so you have all these associations, fighting each other with what, they want to apply as to how to run a society, and it just doesn't fit. So when you come together, like now, what requires the right? Is that an obligation? So, for an example, why is a social compact necessary? It's
Mhm.
like understanding freedom of speech, right? Everyone believes they have freedom of speech without understanding what freedom of speech is. And the reality is that people in general, they confuse freedom of speech with the right to freely speak and express oneself. And to explain this, it's like saying, well, you could be on the street corner yelling in people's faces, but unless someone, you could yell in their faces that you have freedom of speech. But unless someone agrees to stop and listen to you, do you have freedom of speech? And the answer is no. Because the reality is, let's think about the scenario. You have the right to freely speak and express yourself because you're on a street corner yelling in people's faces. But speech is defined as having the right to communicate an audience, sorry, the right to deliver a communication to an audience. So without an audience, who are you giving a speech to? Right? So before having the right to freely have a speech, you have to have someone agree to stop and listen to you first. And you can't force someone to stop and listen to you. So that's what freedom of speech is, the right to an audience. So without a social compact, you don't have an audience. And the social compact is, hey, people coming forward and saying, you specifically, you and them specifically, hey, this is how we define freedom of speech. I agree that you have freedom of speech, and you agree that I have freedom of speech. And then we're going to prove to the public, the whole world, that we agree to the terms of society by authenticating, meaning our signatures and our dates and witnesses, that this is the contract we agree to.
I, I think it's really beautiful because it's kind of like I talk a lot about, well, I've created sort of a community around my business. It's really a business that is about supporting community and creating community of like-minded individuals that have really shared kind of dreams and vision for our world, kind of, whether it's like healthy food, local food, products that are earth aligned, that are just certain, right, like we agree on certain things. So it's kind of, and I talk a lot about kind of we're going to be moving more into kind of a community way of living, and that's something that we used to have and kind of gotten, you know, very purposefully kind of messed with by, the powers that I'll say the powers that were. And so it's kind of like what you're talking about. It feels like it's a really beautiful guide, and it was always meant to be a guide to how we basically create shared community or community spaces, and kind of work through what our shared, basically what's important to us together, and have to agree to that. So it's kind of like a beautiful guide for even just creating a PMA to, yeah, decide what is important, right? And what we want to all agree to, how we want to agree to live together, kind of like shared principles. So I
Mhm.
I love that. It's really cool, actually. It's like helpful to think about things that way.
And that's where the PMA gets its powers from, because you retain your power by the people who you do business with and the terms and conditions that they, provide on the table through their contracts.
And
So,
I think it's like it could be like something really, I like to think really visionary, like this community, and we're creating a future together. But it could also be something really simple, right? I mean, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the PMA could also be used to um well, for like the raw milk store, right? And then I think that in like say a a quote unquote dry county, that private club or like a bar in a sense could be a PMA, and then the members agree that they're all going to have alcohol in that private club. Is that correct? Could you use it like that too, Adam?
yeah, and it's better like if PMAs come together, right? All sorts of PMAs, and they then decide to go into social compact, defining their PMAs under those express powers, right? They create their own state. I mean, and it'll be parallel to the creature state. What they just have to do is they have to correct their survey, meaning they have to go back to the original state survey, you know, and they would have to organize. And they do that, because through the social compact creates executive, legislative, and judicial powers. It does. So they, through that social compact, they create their constitution, which a constitution, all it does is organizes those rights of the social compact. That's what it does. It organizes that executive, judicial, and legislative, including, how they run their money, their borders, and everything. And it's all done by the people. So you
So is
create,
your sorry, go ahead.
Mhm. You create your state, through those social compacts and the organization that provides due process, and your PMAs operate from there. And that's, you have your trading union as to far as the people bringing their businesses together. And it's like, okay, well, I have, I'm just making this up. It's not what's happening. I'm just making an example. But let's say, I work on lawns, but I need a car fix, and there's a mechanic down the street, but he needs solar panels, and I know an electrician down the street that needs his lawn mowed. So I need my car fixed. I go to the mechanic, and he says he needs solar panels. So he goes to the guy who goes solar panels, but he needs his lawn mowed. So I'm able to mow the guy's solar panels lawn, right? He goes and, hook up his solar panels, and in exchange, get my car worked on from the mechanic that got his solar panels worked on. So it's just, that is creating a trade union. And through the trade union, you guys create your own laws on how you want to associate and how you want to create that society on your trade.
Yeah,
And
I
there
love
they
that.
come. Hmm.
Would you feel comfortable sharing about, you don't have to mention them by name or anything, a little bit about that event that you helped create a PMA and how they used it, and how it was like a benefit to them?
Oh, I think I remember correctly. It was, one PMA that I helped a woman that put together a dog grooming shop, right? Maybe that's the one you're referring to.
Um,
She
that too, but there was also like an event, I want to say it was on the East Coast, but I think both would be great if you feel, yeah, if the dog
I
grooming story is great too, because it's great to have examples of like different ones.
Okay, I think you might have to correct me on the other one, but
Okay.
this one, the one I remember is she was working under someone else under a commercial building, doing dog grooming, and it got shut down, and she lost her job over COVID, right? So I told her to just operate, she had a bunch of equipment to do her own dog grooming, shop. So I told her to just operate in her basement, right? And so she started doing that. She started getting a lot of clients, and people were just not happy that she was making money and operating during COVID. So, the health agency in that county contacted her, email, and told her to shut down, right? And so they sent the sheriffs out, right? And so the sheriff came out to her door, knocked on the door, and she saw it was them, and she told them to hold on. She panicked, and she came and got me on the phone. And so I was on speaker, and she came out, and I told her, just say specifically, this is a private membership. Are you members? So that's all she did, is she went and opened the door. I was on the phone just listening. And she said, this is a private membership association. Are you members? And then the deputies, they said, oh, we're just going to go report you to the health department. And I started laughing, and I said, tell her, I told her, tell him, go ahead, report her. And she gets on the phone, they leave. She gets off the phone, and she's like, Adam, what's all that about? Why did you just tell them to go report me to the health department? And I tell her, I said, look, are you meaning to tell me that the health department called out the sheriff to come talk to you so they can report to you to the health department? Make that make sense. Why would the health department ask the sheriff to come out so they could report you to the health department that sent them out?
Right.
Right?
Hmm.
So she was never bothered again.
Yeah,
In short.
that's kind of a big one because when you do events, you have to deal with the health department and probably it's not news to anybody here, but they don't really care about our health. And it's really a lot
Mm,
of, I've had to in the past for a big event, we had to hire somebody for our team. Their only
mhm.
job was to deal with the health department because it took that much time and energy and paperwork and time in person at the event to deal with them. And we're talking about a family friendly event where all of the food is local and organic, and there's so much care that goes into it, and that's a big expense. I also personally, I don't agree. I don't think they with what they're doing. I don't think it's helpful. I don't think it's meaningful. So to be able to like this woman, but also for an event or whatever, to be able to operate without them, involved is so freeing. And of course, it doesn't mean that, she doesn't care about um, you know, making sure that the dogs are healthy and that she's doing a good job, right? It doesn't mean that I don't care about healthy food and making sure that nobody's getting sick, obviously, and that the food is of the best quality. Of course, like we actually care more than the health department does. So it's a huge deal to be able to run your business outside the jurisdiction of like that system, essentially.
Mhm.
Right, Adam, and the thing you were telling me about, I think it was that there was a big event that you helped with the PMA, and I just remember you saying that something happened too, where the police showed up and that they had told them that explained that they're a private membership association and that they don't have jurisdiction because they had private security, which we always have private security at events because usually you're required to, and that they left and said, okay. Um,
Yeah, I think I have an idea what you're talking about. It's not anything that I put together or anything I did. I
oh,
wasn't even there. I had literally nothing to do with it. I was just using an example, but I think
okay.
what you were talking about was Pork Fest in New Hampshire. It's a
Okay.
festival that they have once a year. And so
Yeah.
what happened is that it's a private camping grounds, and it's set up as a private membership association under private international law. And 1 year, and you can go and look reference the video on YouTube. It's just referenced as Pork Fest, or and I don't know, I remember what title it is, but you could come across or stumble on the video. It's not that hard to find. What it was is that it wasn't police, it was tax collectors. They came into the private campgrounds trying to tax the vendors, and they got
Okay.
they got ran off by the people. But then before they got ran off, the owner of the campgrounds invited the tax collectors into his office and pretty much told them how they had no standing to tax any of the tax vendors. And the tax accountants or people, they left in shame, embarrassed,
Mm.
because they just proven that they had no standing to collect any taxes from those vendors. And ever
Wow.
since, that festival has been left alone. It's been years and years, and they're always left alone.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, this is just so huge because we've essentially, this is very heady stuff for me because I'm just not used to thinking legal terms, and I'm sure it is for a lot of you guys listening, but it's so important because it's basically showing how we've just kind of been out of sleep at the wheel. We've really given over our power to these corrupt entities, this corrupt overlay, and that it's time to kind of just take it back, in all the ways. And a lot of the people, like the tax guys you're talking about, or probably the cops, a lot of people don't even fully understand these things that are in the system, right? A lot of people probably just thought like they were choosing, something that was noble, and um they don't really understand the negative aspects of it necessarily either. So it's like we're all on this journey learning together, but we really can just choose to take our power back and um do, kind of do what Adam is showing how to do, or what he's creating. Also, yeah, well, I want to say this too. Adam does help people create PMAs. So if you're listening to this and you're starting a new project or a business and you're like, yeah, this is really resonating. I want to learn more. I want to create a PMA. I'll put Adam's information below, but you can definitely reach out to him, and he helps to set up all the documents and can do classes with you to really get into the details. So he has helped me set up a PMA for Mercado Sagrado, and I'm so grateful. So that's available to you. And um, yeah, so it's just a really powerful tool. And obviously, after think a lot of things are changing right now, but still, however it does, I still think it's really great to learn more about the what we're in, and to choose, like Adam is saying, like to choose to start operating either in the framework of an actual PMA, or just to think about like what you're talking about, Adam, with the social compact. Like, what are we agreeing to? What are we available for? What do we want in our world? What do I want in my home, on my land? What do I want with my community? What principles are we living by? What's important to us? Because what we were handed, what most of us are born into, is there a lot of corruption and a lot of yucky stuff, basically an inversion. So I don't like the way that animals are treated in factory farms, for example. I don't like a lot of these systems. And this is a time when we're starting to really many people are starting to be more aware of it, and we're kind of taking it back. So this is how like you can do this personally. So
Correct.
yeah, I love everything that um you're sharing, Adam. I don't know if do you want to read from that book that you
Yeah,
pulled up
yeah,
before, and maybe tell everybody what that actually is, because that seemed
sure,
important to maybe
sure.
share.
Can I share this first about the social compact? So,
Yes,
right?
please.
Just
Yeah.
a reference. Okay. So, why social compacts are necessary, right? Because this is actually how our country was founded and how our systems are supposed to be organized. Like, we came over here from the Mayflower Compact, right? That was the first definition of our compact here. But if we go in further, right, the first two states, which are Delaware and Maryland, right, they defined in their Declaration of Rights, it said that a right of free government originates from the people, is founded in compact only. So
Mhm.
public governments are only defined in social compacts. And there's the reason why this is important sharing, because I want to share what's going on today and a result of what's happening. So back in the day, the states used to operate through social compacts, and they did away with it. And the best example to show of how they did away with it is by looking at the history of Florida, the Florida's constitutions. Okay, so
Mhm.
if you look at Florida's first constitution of 1838, it says in its Declaration of Rights that when all free men form a social compact, they are then equal and free in rights, right?
Mhm.
So free men and definition as to that, there was slavery at the time. I'm not saying there's anything good or that I'm pro slavery. I'm just saying that that's what existed at that time was slavery. And so going back to the Constitution post the Civil War, because the Civil War ended in 1865, right? In 1869, Florida modified and amended their constitution or changed it a bit, right? And now they changed it from all free men when they form a social compact to all men when all men are equal in rights. So they went from all free men when they form a social compact are equal and free in rights to all men are equal in rights. And then in 1883 or 1888, I don't remember which year, they changed the Constitution again to say that all men are equal before the law and equal in rights. So they took out the social compact. Why? The reason is because they wanted to reconstruct and enforce the Jim Crow law era and the segregation between blacks and whites. They didn't want black people to have the right to publicly carry guns, and you can reference that in Florida's constitution. And the old constitutions it says that people have the right to keep and bear arms. Then it went from the Jim Crow law era and the segregation area to say that people can keep and bear arms, except the legislator may prescribe what may be borne in public, meaning what can be carried in public. So they changed it because now they don't want black people carrying guns in public. They took the social compact out because they didn't want black people to have the same freedom of speech,
Right.
right? They didn't want black people to have, the right to be free from searches and seizures of their property. So they took the social compact out. So now it's legislators all over in every state and the federal, right, operating without a social compact with the people, meaning they're unilaterally making rules on everyone else. And that's remove the consent of the governed, which means
Right.
it's slavery.
So they
And
took the
the
people out, our voice out of it, basically.
take your voice out. And this is beginning of the United States Constitution. I mean, it's been planned way before that, right? But if you go read Pato Ford Fay and Co. versus Alderman and Mayor of City of Savannah, Georgia, and that ruling from the Supreme Court, it states that the United States Constitution is a compact, and we are not parties to it, meaning the social compact, which is a private society. It's a secret society, private compact, which everyone knows as the Bill of Rights. And it only applies to state bodies or state parties, which they reclassify to mean government entities or office holders, like governors, attorney generals, you know, members of the legislature. So it's like when you go to court, they tell you straight up. You just people don't get it and they don't read the case law. They don't read the obligations of everything and they don't understand the acceptance that is necessary of a contract. They're not understanding that they're saying that you're not a party to these Bill of Rights. You can't reference them. You can't use them. They're telling you that they're reserved for only state bodies, which is what they reclassify to mean government office holders. And then when you look back in the state constitutions, which the state constitution is how the state's supposed to operate in its organization for its social compact, the Declaration of Rights is empty because no one authenticated their signature, their date, and witnesses that they accepted that contract. So the states have been abandoned. There's no compacts enforcing the will of the people. And when people talk about representation, they don't understand representation. They think if they vote for somebody, that's the representation. The vote is not the representation. The social compact is. It's to make an example of the logic of it. Is that when I vote for someone, I vote for them to do a specific thing, an obligation. I don't vote for them to do whatever they want for me. It's not what they want. I voted for them to do something for me, not for whatever they want, something for me. And that what they are supposed to do, that obligation is the social compact. So the representation is the social compact.
Yeah, so it's super important. And yeah, we basically can create our own. I guess now we can take back our power and decide what is important to us. Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to the what you were gonna have me read is from the book of Trust Business that was written and published by the American Institute of Banking.
Mhm.
So this comes and like private membership associations are pretty much like trusts but bigger, as it has association type rules, you know being able to define it by your bylaws and your organization, which is your constitution. But in the sense they operate in the same way, except the only difference is that you privately defined them and their PMA, as of course a trust is by express design, right? So this is what it's written from that book. Okay. It says, grouped according to their beneficiaries, there are 5 kinds of trusts: personal, corporate, employee, community, and institutional. A personal trust is a trust created for the benefit of natural persons, which are individual human beings. A corporate trust is one created by a corporation for the benefit of itself and its bondholders. An employee's trust is created by a business enterprise for the benefit of its employees. A community trust is one created primarily for the general welfare of the community being the city, county, state, country, or world. An institutional trust is one created for the benefit of a charitable or other public institution, such as a college or a hospital. Personal trusts are classified in 3 ways: according to the duties of the trustee, according to the character of the trust, according to the method of the trust. Corporate trusts which are the primary source of a corporation's capital, is the funds supplied by the stockholders whose respective interests in the corporation are evidenced by certificates of shares of the stock. Employees' trust is a trust established for the benefit of employees in a common enterprise. A community trust is a trust composed of gifts and bequests made by citizens of a community for the benefit of the people of the community. An institutional trust is one created by or for educational, charitable, or other public institutions for the benefit of the objects served by the institution. Okay.
So
So,
am I, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, you good. Go ahead.
I was gonna just clarify. So is it correct to interpret what you've just read as those are all the different kind of categories or ways we could conceive of creating a PMA and or how they've been used in the past by some big entities even? Is that true?
It's just by natural way of operating. Like if you operate under your natural person, you're doing it for the purposes of passing something down, not just in benefit to you, but as well as giving it, from what they call inter vivos, which is from one living being to another. So, it could be either property or some other kind of inheritance. Like, for an example, if you revert back to the Old Testament, how the way they move generation to generation down is that they would, pretty much have whatever they decided to pass the lineage down to learn the Bible, like the learn, one generation after the other, and they had to pass that down to the next generation so they know where they came from you know so an association can have different roles, but specifically natural persons would deal with inheritance of property or other type of intellectual property or whatever it may be, right? You have corporations that would have a group of people, or it could be one person, it don't matter, but would have shares of that type of association, shares of it, which is property for accumulation purposes. And an employee's trust. No, go ahead. You were saying
So
something?
there's just a lot of different ways we can use this because I was during COVID, there was a group that was creating a hospital, and I'd love to
Hmm.
follow up on this project, but they were creating a hospital, their own PMA hospital, essentially.
Okay. Yeah. Which a lot of doctors do operate under private membership associations. They do. It's actually very big in the healthcare industry.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that
I
makes
think,
that makes sense.
right,
Hmm.
uh, they do that to avoid liability and suits and all.
Yeah,
But
so
mhm.
oh, sorry, go ahead. I was just gonna say that I work with frequency medicine, different things like that. So it would be, and I've worked with a lot of different practitioners that kind of fall outside the normal sort of Western medicine allopathic framework. And they could, in essence, it'd be great for them to have a PMA if they're doing, say, maybe ozone therapy or just some sort of like frequency healing or whatever, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Um,
it's like, as long as you show that like your methods work and you're following international law, if you defined it under international law, right, they can't they if they can't rebut international law, then they can't really come after you, because you
okay.
know that's the power of PMAs, is that when their creature state comes against you, you come up and say, okay, this is how you're violating international law. And so, in order to
Okay.
do that, you have to operate outside of what they're doing. Now, remember, they're not operating under social compacts. So it's just government by who you do business with. Private government, because it's a private company. It's just a private company, meaning it's for investments, it's for accumulation powers. So it's not a public service, meaning it's not public government. So you're just doing business with a private company offering government services. And that's how, So I don't know if you ever seen the movie The Postman. You ever seen that movie with Kevin Costner?
Yes, but very long time ago. Yeah. Hmm.
All right. So you remember in the beginning, he got kidnapped by that army. and he got branded, right? And
Mhm.
he told the laws of that army, which they call it the laws of eight, right?
Mhm.
And he ends up escaping and starting his own post office and trying to bring back a government, right? And in the end, he actually faces off the army that kidnapped him, right? In the beginning. And they have a big army, right? And he thinks the best solution is to, pretty much what they call invoke the rule of eight, right? Which is to challenge the leader for the rights of the clan. And the leader says, you don't have that right. You're not a member of the clan, right? And so Kevin Costner in the movie, he rips off his sleeve and he shows his marking, that little eight they put on his arm, and he says, I am a member of the clan and I do have rights to challenge the leader of the clan because he was under it, he was subjected to it. If you
Okay.
claim rights from something, you're subjected to it and you're going to be under its laws. And so, under what has been established under the current state right now, is what's called an inhabitants or inhabitant, which, if you refer back to the law of nations, which specifically, I think it's subsection 213 of the law of nations, the inhabitant is defined of someone of an inferior citizen, meaning is someone who is obligated to defend and protect his country or the country, but doesn't get to take an advantage of all of its benefits. So, in other words, an inhabitant is a stateless person, somewhat of a slave. And so, if you look into what they've done, over the course of history of this country, they made everyone, unless you're a member of the legislature, a member of an office holder in their private political society that they have going on, then you're a stateless inhabitant. You're not a citizen of their cause or their country, their so-called country, but it's not a real country because the United States, which is a private association, can never gain statehood. Its structure is the same as McDonald's.
An overlay,
Literally,
basically. Yeah, like a
it's
corrupt overlay.
operating right. It's operating under an overlay, like the municipal status, right? And then through the state and the federal, right? The differences between a federal and a federation and a confederation, is that the membership of a confederation is voluntary as opposed to a federation, which is not. So then again, they're saying we're subjected to them, but they haven't gave us a transparent and full disclosed contract of our obligation and rights. And to say the Bill of Rights, well, every time I went to any court, I was told, I would be called a sovereign citizen domestic terrorist, which I've seen over and over, for going in and say, well, I have the First Amendment, I have the Second Amendment, I have the Third Amendment. They call it literally. I've seen it over the years, over and over, them calling people sovereign citizen domestic terrorists for going in those courts and saying that they have these rights.
Yeah, it's so wild. It's like
Mhm.
you could talk for hours. There's so many intricacies. I want to kind of maybe, yeah, kind of, I want to ask you one more question, but I feel like maybe we should revisit the rest in another conversation because it's so much to absorb. Um,
Right.
but it's just like amazing what we didn't know, right? Most of us. But
Mhm.
I wanted to see, okay, this is a question I almost always get when I bring up the PMA thing with, kind of someone on the street, right? So, and I'm curious how you would answer it. I feel like you already have, but maybe just be good to kind of wrap up on. So I'll kind of explain, do my best of explaining what a PMA is, and people, will almost always say, okay, well, isn't that relative? Doing basically when I'll say it's, you still can't do harm, right? So you're gonna have a PMA, but you still can't obviously murder people in the PMA or create harm, right? But there
Mhm.
is a little bit of a relative notion of, say, what if somebody thinks, like, I believe organic grass-fed raw milk is super healthy. Well, what if somebody else thinks that's not true and that is doing harm by selling that product? So where's the kind of limit as far as that goes? with the international law aspect? Like,
Mhm.
how would you respond to somebody asking that? Does that make sense? My question.
The best way to explain that is understanding how the world works, right? And if you even look at any of the procedure or due process in any court, even created in the so-called, United States and its private subsidiaries, right? It all works the same, which is state a claim upon which relief shall be granted, right? That's how the work works, or the world works, right? You know, um, so you look back at the claim from Jesus, what Jesus did. That was he stated a claim upon which relief shall be granted. So everything works on remedy and recourse, right? So when it comes down to, PMAs, what it really is it's a record. You're stating claims. You make your organization through your
Okay.
constitution, you draft your bylaws and how you operate, you accept a social compact or you present one, so you tell people how you operate in society and the type of obligations and rules you acknowledge to enforce human rights through peremptory norms, state practice, and opinion of jurists, right? And then so in a sense, that's what it's doing, because law, right? Law is state a claim upon which relief shall be granted. That means making a statement that someone cannot come up and rebut. So a statement unrebutted stands to be truth and facts and law, and that's all about perfecting claims. So when someone comes forward and say, "Well, I think selling raw milk products is harmful," well, show me the proof and show me the evidence. State a claim upon which relief shall be granted.
Mhm.
And
Got
according
it.
to your evidence, you have to sell it. It's not just producing it, because it's the burden on the prosecutor to prove intent and to
Okay.
prove, you know.
Got it.
So
Yeah.
the way this world works, state a claim upon which relief shall be granted.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Yes. Okay, that's very helpful. Um, well, thank you so much, Adam. I so appreciate you having this conversation. I hope I did okay with kind of my end, because it's so
Well,
heady for me and I'm still wrapping my brain around it. But thank you for all you've shared today. I
yeah.
really appreciate it.
Well, you helped, asking questions and pretty much helping direct smoothly the flow of having to explain it, because I don't have anything that I just recite from. I just kind of like wing it and flow it most of the time. And the reason why I believe I'm confident in it is because I'm the person that brings receipts. Like, meaning anything I talk about, I can show you from the source of the law and reference it and show this is the evidence of it and this is how I'm proving it. I'm stating the claims upon which relief shall be granted. So that in a sense is, you help drive that narrative, bringing that out. And, I thank you for that. Made it easier for me to present, myself here.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks. Perfect. Thank you so much, Adam. And
Mhm.
again, like, just thanks for listening, you guys. And Adam's information will be below. And so if you're interested in learning more, setting up a PMA, doing classes with him, yeah, his info is below and you can reach out. But thank you so much, Adam, and thanks for joining us. And I hope you guys all have a beautiful rest of your day. Aloha.
Thank you.